everyone. Thank you so much for coming back for the second speech of mine. Good to see you all. Thank you so much. Alrighty. So, off of that verse we just read, we're just going to talk about some of the work that some Christian organizations are doing in the pro-life campaign. They're doing some really great work. Some of these I've actually seen. I've actually seen one of these billboards in Tucson. Have any of you seen any of them? I've actually seen this one, not too far from here. Yeah. So they're doing some really great things. And a lot of these messages, they all seem really good. But it seems just to be missing just something. So I bet we can all agree that all of those little lives are very precious, aren't they? They're all very valuable. But isn't life for this little girl just as valuable? And what about these children? Aren't all these lives valuable?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so I've been pro-life pretty much always, I guess. But I've noticed that a lot of the pro-life messages out there, they rarely ever mention God at all. Rarely ever. So I've been doing a lot of studying on the image of God and what it means. And that's where we get the foundation of why life is valuable in the first place. Why human life is valuable. So I believe terminating any pregnancy is wrong because all human life is created in the image of God. That means all human life is valuable. Okay, so we're going to be looking at a few things. We're going to be looking at how prenatal testing is affecting the termination of pregnancies and how it's contributing to that. And we're going to talk about why the image of God is important in the pro-life arguments and why it should not be left out. And we're going to look at some scriptural support to use, regarding, in conversations about abortion. Okay? So it's very important as a Christian, when we're talking about, the value of life and talking about these kinds of issues, a lot of times we're asked very difficult questions. And it's important to be able to know how to answer those questions and how to handle those kind of conversations. So first, let's take a look at the problem here. All right, so abortions are being justified as being a humane choice. When they're, prenatal testing is done and you find out this child is going to have birth defects, spina bifida, Down syndrome, missing arm or something like that. And it's, it's been shown as like a humane choice because aren't you preventing the suffering of a child by ending the pregnancy? I found this article on the National Library of Medicine. Okay, it was from a few years ago, and they were specifically researching several studies about how prenatal testing was affecting termination of pregnancies. Okay, so they analyzed 15 different studies from around the world, mainly in North America and Europe. Okay, and they found that just for spina bifida alone, okay, just this one birth defect, they found that 63% of pregnancies were terminated because of that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's shocking. But if you read further into it, that's pretty much like the average. But in diagnosis where the unborn baby is less than 6 months old, it jumped to 86% for pregnancies. And that's just one birth defect. Just that one. This man's name is Frank Stevens. He, last October, this past year, he actually gave a testimony on Capitol Hill. This is a man he's an award-winning actor, and he's also a man with Down syndrome, and he's an activist in rights for people with Down syndrome. Yeah, so he's a great, you really should see this whole speech. Yeah, yes. So he expresses concerns. Some of his major concerns was that research for Down syndrome is considered not important anymore. He's worried that, the people are deeming that there doesn't need to be any more research for people with Down syndrome because you can just terminate the pregnancy. He says this is giving a message that he says people like me should not exist. That's what message is giving out. Okay. So there are several Christian organizations that promote pro-life. This is one of the Family Research Council. Okay, so they promote, this is a Christian organization, they promote life and a few other Christian principles. Okay, but life is one of them. But the problem that we're having when it comes to pro-life, children should live, and but what about children with birth defects? Is that this is actually the first thing you see when you go onto their right site. You go to issues, go to life and abortion. This is the first thing you see. See, God is the author of life. And they do say that every human life is an intrinsic good. But that's all it says. It doesn't say why human life is an intrinsic good. And if God is the author of all life, which is true, but what makes the animal's life different than a human's life? So we're having that, debate. Well, you have to be humane. It's humane to put, a suffering animal to sleep and have its misery. Why wouldn't it be humane to prevent the suffering of a child that's obviously going to be incurable, have a difficult life, that sort of thing? Without showing that why life is valuable, you miss the whole point of why human life is intrinsic value. Okay? Further into their site, if you look around, they have this guy Tony Perkins. So he does this Washington update, and they talk about different things. This one's actually an article that was just put out on March 6th. Okay? So this is an excerpt from Courtney Baker's letter to her doctor, talking about how she had a child, or she was pregnant. They had diagnosed the child as having Down syndrome. And then the doctor very strongly encouraged them to end the pregnancy. And when they continued to decide they wanted to continue the pregnancy, do you understand right here how low our quality of life would be with a child with Down syndrome? Yeah, so they're really, really pushing, that the termination of pregnancies and those things. And later on, this article is talking about Iceland. Iceland has gotten to almost, and they're proud to say it, 100% termination rate for pregnancies with Down syndrome.
Wow.
Yeah, very, very sad thing. Okay, but Tony Perkins, he gets something right here. Tony Perkins, in this article, it's on the Family Research Council's website, once you get into it, but in this article, he finally gets to the point. He says, today it's children with Down syndrome. Tomorrow it's seniors with dementia. Once you lose the moral foundation that says people are valuable because they're created in the image of God, anything is possible. Mm-hmm. Now you see where we're headed without the image of God in our pro-life campaigns. Okay, but what does the Bible say about the implications specifically about the image of God? We already know Genesis 1 and 2 talks about we're created in God's image. But Genesis 9 actually equates, it puts it together, that killing people is wrong because man is made in the image of God. Okay, it puts it right there together, right after the flood. He's talking about that. And then Exodus 21 talks specifically about the unborn child. There was actually a penalty in law for accidentally harming an unborn child. Now the Bible does not specifically talk about deliberately hurting an unborn child, because it wasn't, something that was done. But you can obviously take the implication. If it was wrong to accidentally hurt an unborn child, then of course it must be wrong to intentionally hurt an unborn child, right? Okay, and then we are often faced with the question about when life begins. Is it at birth? Is it at conception? What point? Usually it's at a sliding scale. Right now they're saying, at what point, how much developed are they to, be considered life? Okay, but it's actually talked about in detail. David talks about it in detail. He talks about being from the womb. In my mother's womb you made me. Before I was even formed, you had a plan for my life. So the Bible specifically talks about God not only taking care to form us in the womb, but also that He's making a plan for each person's life from the point of being in the womb. Now Isaiah and Paul said the same things, that God called them from the womb to be of service. Okay? So we do live in a fallen world, right? And the human DNA is getting more and more perfect. So we're having more and more birth defects. But Romans 8:28 says that God works all things for good For those who love him are called according to his purpose. People like this little boy. Remember this picture earlier? His name is Nick Vujicic. He is now this man. He's established Life Without Limbs. You might have heard of him? Yes. Since he was 19 years old, he's about 33 now, he has been to over 63 countries, spreading the news of Jesus and how Jesus loves you and just bringing salvation to so many people. He says if God can use a man without arms and legs to be his hands and feet, then he will certainly use any willing heart. Isn't that amazing? So in summary, we've seen how abortion is being justified because of birth defects. But the pro-life arguments not founded on the image of God fails to address this issue. And there's lots of scriptural evidence that we saw supporting a pro-life stance. Okay? So, again, no pregnancy should be terminated. Every life is valuable. And we know every life is valuable because it was created in the image of God. Okay? So we need to now make sure that we're telling other people this message, making sure we're telling them, not leaving out, the value of life is in the image of God that we all carry from conception. Because God has a purpose for every life. Thank you so much.
Good job.